la, la, la.
So I would like at some point, if possible, maybe to do an entire show on Bathtubs over Broadway. That would be phenomenal to do that, because I got questions when it comes to that, man. Like the doc, it seems like the doc would answer everything for me. It just opened up a bunch of doors, and they do relate to Letterman as well. Like some of them, like okay, here's an example of one, and then we can talk about Bathtubs, but obviously, you know, what we're cultivating here is a Letterman podcast and audience. But I got to ask you this question. Tony Randall made so many appearances, especially in the early years of Late Show and Late Night as well. But when you first met Tony Randall, like, did you want to just rush over to him and start asking him about industrial musicals, or did you not cross lines when guys like that would show up on the show?
Two factors prevented that happening. Number one, I don't believe I ever met Tony Randall. The number of guests on the show who I've actually personally met and said hello to could probably be counted on the fingers of two hands.
Wow.
And number two, I think Tony Randall had already passed away by the time my excavations got deep enough to reveal his involvement with this stuff. And in fact, I think it wasn't until I was looking at, I don't know, stuff at Sid Siegel's house around 2017 and seeing, I think it was a Hardee's restaurant show that Tony Randall was in. Oh my God, Tony Randall did this stuff. So that was way down the road.
Oh man, that is, I can imagine that must have given you kind of some shivers when you saw that, because it's like, that's a guy that you could have talked to very, very easily had you had that knowledge.
There have been ones like that, but we had Tony Randall on Dave's record collection. He recorded a sort of 30s-ish do whack-a-do, whack-a-do, whack-a-do. And I just remember that was just sort of cheerfully silly in itself. And then you had to have the blow off line, which was Dave saying, Tony, do whack-a-don't. That's all you need.
That's all you need. That's all. Hey, take my money. Okay, so before we kind of leave Bathtubs, and I'm fine if people just are, you know, confused by the start of this, that's okay. We got Steve Young.
It's going to get much worse.
Absolutely.
I will say, not only Bathtubs over Broadway has Dave Letterman in it.
Yes.
Executive produced by Dave Letterman. He lent his name to it very, very kindly. He supported us financially at the very beginning when no one knew what this was going to be.
Yeah.
But it grew out of the Dave's record collection bit on the show. And we were the only people ever allowed to shoot backstage or in the offices at the Letterman show.
Yes.
And the filmmaker, writer, director, editor, Dava Whisenant, I met her when she was a Late Show editor. So the whole Bathtubs experience, top to bottom, has this Letterman pedigree to it.
Oh, it absolutely does. Yeah. Okay. So anybody who is would consider themselves even a passing fan of any of Dave's projects and wants to go a little bit further, Bathtubs over Broadway needs to be watched, because really at the end of the day, it's the genesis. I don't know if there's ever been a bit like, I mean, you know, you got your Wayne's World, they got a movie, the Blues Brothers, they got a movie. Okay, so we're talking some sketches here, but this is a bit from a late night talk show, literally evolved into a documentary, and it's so funny. There's a lot of folks out there who myself included, who would watch Dave's record collection and be like I was confused when these records would come on. I was so confused. I was like, did they record this for the bit and get the art department to create a bogus album and all of that stuff?
Yeah.
I thought it was, and if that was the case, that would have been genius too. But the truth is even better. The fact that this thing even exists. Oh my God.
Dave's barometer for found comedy, he was very rigorous about it. It's completely ruined if we monkeyed with it, as he would have said. But the book, which you see in the documentary, came out in 2013, and I remember in the Letterman offices showing the book to a guy I knew not well. He hadn't known about my collection really, but he flipped through this book and said, "This is incredible. This is wow. Well, look at all that." And then he looked at me and said, "But this is all made up, right?" Like he just thought this can't actually have all been real. And that's what kind of rewires people's brains. They think this enormous hidden piece of show business that on the face of it is utterly absurd and yet is like way off the charts in terms of the money spent and the talent involved. This makes no sense. You've never heard of this. So there you go. We can save deep dives into that for another time.
Okay, fair enough. I appreciate that. And maybe I can be professional enough to kind of segue this a little bit. You weren't a fan of Broadway stuff so much the way that some folks are. Now there are a lot of folks that you worked with that love Broadway and are so the question I have is and I think about guys like Shecky, who I know quite well, and some of these other folks who love Broadway. As you were moving down the very interesting rabbit hole and kind of learning about Broadway and learning about some of these things through the industrials thing, did you ever go to these people and pick their brain about, hey, did this person ever work on Broadway? Or did you because it was kind of neat, you kind of jumping into that world because of this?
I knew like Barbara Gaines seemed to be quite knowledgeable about Broadway shows and all that. In my early years of investigating this stuff, I think I more leaned on talent department Rolodexes. Like if I wanted to try to get in touch with Hal Linden.
Sure.
Because Hal, everybody loves Barney Miller. I don't want to ask you about Barney Miller. I want to ask you about the Detroit Diesel Engine musical. So occasionally there was a little help from that quarter, but I didn't feel like people in the halls at the show were talking about Broadway all that much, so it didn't naturally, organically come up. Although you mentioned Shecky, very helpful at various points because of his enormous film collection. And he said, "Oh, I think I got some weird stuff in the back room on a shelf. And is this the sort of stuff you mean?" And some of that shows up in the documentary, like the Purina Dog Chow musical that I would not know about if it were not for Shecky.
Oh, that warms my heart so much. I love that guy so much, and I appreciate that. That's very, very cool. Again, we're not starting chronologically here, and I'm cool with that. I was told by another staffer to ask you about some of the songs that you've written and done. The Thanksgiving song, of course, amazing. The staffer, she said to me, she goes, "That's one of my very favorite things of the whole show was memories of the whole show was your Thanksgiving song, the Super Bowl song. Oh my God. Were you musical when you started, like back in the day at NBC? Were you already musical, or did your musical ability and things evolve as your career evolved and it's just something that you did on the side?
That it very slowly evolved. I would say, an average music fan. Like I grew up kind of listening to a moderately eclectic batch of rock and roll, and then I saw Amadeus and got into Mozart, and then it's just this landscape of like Chuck Berry and a little of this, and then country music and bluegrass, but that was all just, I didn't know how to put that together with my day job.
Right.
It very, very slowly started to come about. I decided to get serious about guitar lessons around 2004 and started picking up some finger picking chops and thought, oh, I love this. I seem to have an affinity for this. And so I had several years of lessons. So I was getting pretty good, and I was composing instrumental pieces, but I, for a long time, felt like there's that realm of creativity, and then there's the world of words and ideas. That's the day job. And I very cautiously thought, what would happen if I made a Venn diagram that overlapped these two circles? And I think the earliest was, it was close to the Thanksgiving song, somewhere around 2013 or so. There had been a couple odd outliers very early back in the 90s. You may recall the piece we did on NBC and CBS, The Strong Guy, the Fat Guy, the Genius.
Absolutely. You composed that?
The theme song I worked up with Rob Burnett, And then we sort of gave a demo to Paul Schaefer and the band, and they, as they always did, just took your little nervous sounding sweaty scraps of whatever and turned it into a magnificent slugfest of music. So that was
it was kind of like a Western, sort of a kind of a,
yeah, it had
yeah,
rawhide feel to it. Yeah.
Yes, rawhide. That's exactly the word. Yes.
Yeah, I think all these guys and Felicia, ladies, had such a wide range of references. Like you could just throw out something like they were working it up in rehearsal, and Paul said to Will, try more like a rawhide bass. So suddenly, oh, and did you enjoy my Paul Schaefer impression? Oh,
I enjoyed them all. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, there's not a moment of this, Steve, that I'm not enjoying. This is delightful.
Well, that's pleasant for me to hear as well. But it was around 2013 that I had gotten up to the point where, okay, I enjoy playing guitar and inventing things, and I'm cautiously optimistic about saying I could write songs with lyrics that reflect my sensibility. And it was probably the Thanksgiving song and a couple others. There was a Christmas song, I think, that aired that year. Also, I don't know if you know that one. I don't know if that's on YouTube anyway. Or it was it's like,
okay, Don, are you watching? I wouldn't be surprised if he's watching. I don't think he's got a feed into this or not, but he's very quick. So Don, let's figure that out. Let's find it somehow. Let's get it to Walter. Yeah. The Christmas song, early 90s.
This is in the 2013 range.
Okay, yeah,
doing more deliberate. And it was like a Christmas song about it was called Unsanitary Manger. It's like you're courting danger if you have your kid in a manger. And
you're courting danger if you have a kid in a manger.
All those filthy camels, each with millions of germs, and those other Middle Eastern mammals. Many have parasitical worms. It was something like that. It's just so festive.
Well, it writes itself after that, doesn't it? I mean,
well, the goal is with comedy or music to make it seem like it wrote itself and make it seem inevitable, even though you've sweated behind the scenes on 100 drafts of something or whatever.
There's a special kind of joy when that perfect word just shows up, isn't there?
Yeah.
To the right mind, anyway.
When the thing falls out of the sky on you and you just catch it, as opposed to aggressively hunting small to medium ideas through the forests and fields for hours and maybe not catching them. But you mentioned the Super Bowl song.
Yeah.
That was one of the few times when I actually had an idea that I wanted to think about on off hours. Like I remember I never took work home on the weekend. I mean, I'd think of a fun fact or some odd idea would occur to me, but I sat down, I had the idea for this song and I worked on it on the weekend and brought it in on Monday and gave it to Matt Roberts and said, see what you think of this. And he saw some value to it. But yeah, that was one of those, like it has a 99 bottles of beer on the wall feel to it. Like when the singer, I forget the guy's name. He was terrific.
The NFL historian, quote unquote.
Yeah. He really walked a crazy tightrope in that performance and made it across flawlessly. But the audience, I've always thought it was very interesting in that song. The song, for anyone who doesn't know it, it's basically just reciting Roman numerals 1 through 48, which gets very tough rhythmically the further you get into XXXI, XXXIV. And I think when the audience realized IV, VI, and they thought, oh no, they're not seriously going to do this. And then somewhere around probably the 20s or the 30s, I think there was a dawning realization, this is actually working and he might land this plane and it will be kind of weirdly awesome.
Yep.
And then he did land the plane and it's just, oh my God. And I've read that Andy Kaufman actually used to do 99 bottles of beer on the wall and have that affect the audience, where the audience would be very angry at first.
Yep.
How dare he embark upon this pointless, extremely lengthy, absurd conceptual project? And then somewhere in the 60s or 50s, we see over the horizon to the end of this, and it is going to be unbelievable and awesome. And we're going to be able to say, you wouldn't believe what this guy did, but he did it, and we were there. So there was a little taste of that somehow. I'm just so thankful it worked out. Paul and the band again turned a sort of crude iPhone demo into this like powerhouse of a performance with that singer. Oh, I can't remember his name now.
Well, maybe by the end of the episode, or we'll try and maybe find it and quote it in the description if possible, or I would love to. I want to get this show to a place where, like I'm trying hard. I'm calling Walter and all these people. I'm trying to get this thing official. So it would be so cool if, as we archive this thing, we could officially insert clips and things like that. But if the videos exist online, we'll definitely put them in afterwards. And we're building that mechanism into the show here. And I would love to do that because there's a lot of people who did performances like that. Similar again, a fisherman can recognize another fisherman. The way that you have brought awareness to the industrial musicals, there's moments on the show, and that's the part I can't wrap my head around, the fact that there is so much gold that you held for a moment and threw away because there was a next night where you had to mine for more gold if you could. And I call it the greatest body of broadcasting work in history because it is. And there's so many of those moments that I would love to collect and throw out there and for generations to come, because so much of it is timeless. You talk about I want to go back to something that you talk about, which is the journey of a bit, and it could go long running. Like, I mean, how many times did Dave ask a musical actor, "Are those your drums?" And 6 months later, he's still asking the same question. And we had Steve Weiner on the show not too long ago. He talked about the pencil through the window or the card through the window, and it wasn't funny, but then it became funny. Then it became an institution. Are there ever times, like, you're a genius when it comes to this stuff? I'm sure you're gonna not accept this compliment, but you're a mind of the highest caliber when it comes to comedy. Everything at its highest level is philosophy. Can you predict that? Can you ever take an idea that's conceptual and then say, you know what, we could probably turn this into an institution? Or is that something that just happens?
It's very tricky and uncertain to plan for a refillable or plan for a signature bit. And you well know the sort of offhanded way that something like the top 10 list came into being. And then later, okay, sometimes Dave wanted to retire the top 10 list, or what can we do that it's great and comforting and stabilizing to have refillable forms that you can go to. But finding the right one that Dave might say no on one day, and if you'd pitched him the same idea a week later, for some reason he might have said yes. So you're always playing with 10 different ways for things to not hit the perfect spot. But I remember Will It Float came out of one of those very specific, we need a new signature piece. We deliberately are going to try to think of a thing that we could do again and again with certain, hopefully fun elements and unpredictability and kinetic television, delightful chaos. So, but there were lots of other ideas in that batch of pitches which might have been good and just didn't happen to be picked. I think we did very well with Will It Float, which I think was Carter and Craig's idea.
Yep.
I pitched in that same realm, just like every night it's like, what's in the cab's trunk? And a cab would drive down 53rd Street and stop. Cab driver would get out and open the trunk, and there'd be some surprising thing there, just sort of elemental and random and whatever. And it might have worked. It might have not caught on for 10 different reasons, but yeah, it's so unpredictable. You can aim for the refillable and the classic bit. You might try what seems like a surefire thing, and it just somehow doesn't quite land with the audience. And then you say, all right, never mind, we'll try something else.
Well, one thing I'm glad about is that Spike TV is no longer on the air, because they would have taken that idea and it would be a show next week now. Looking
Did I get any money from it?
I don't know. I think about, like, is this something?
Is this anything?
Or is this anything? And then you have the bizarre performers from across the land. I love the idea of that. and then Dave and Paul just kind of riffing off those things. Those were just riffs too, right? Like,
yeah, I think so.
yeah.
But that was an example of, I don't know, is this anything was actually a phrase that writers would use in like pitch meetings where you'd say, I have the beginning of an idea, I'm not sure. See if you guys think this is anything.
Yep.
And what if this, and so you get this sort of ironic detachment at the same time you get to actually have the guy on unicycle spinning plates, and it's like the embracing of some weird vaudeville act at the same time you're saying we don't know about this and we're not endorsing this necessarily. So
Yeah.
you get that sort of dualism of, yes, this is on our show and we don't know what this is and this is barely our show.
Right. I appreciate you letting me kind of just pick your brain and jump around like this. I want to go back to the beginning, and where I want to talk about this is Mr. O'Donnell. What a class act of a man that guy is. I referenced one of the funniest speeches I've ever heard. You're a public speaker, and I want to talk to you about that before this show is over today. And he received the Herb Sargent Award, and the footage of that, it might be one of the greatest acceptance speeches I've ever seen. And I don't think he ever accepted the award. All he did was he talked about the beautiful, amazing experiences he had with people that he worked with along the way, and did it in an extremely clever manner. As part of that speech, I highly recommend anybody, obviously not right now, but when this is over, go and yeah, there you go. Then go and watch that the Herb Sargent Award where Steve O'Donnell won the prize. Steve Young introduced him, and it was very cool because while Mr. O'Donnell was talking about all these people that he got a chance to work with along the way, he was kind of making the point of what your introduction was. And your introduction was, here's a guy who put a hand down and pulled me up and gave me so much. And I've heard that about him. Daniel Kellison talked about that, and other people have talked about how Steve has done that for them. Safe to say, as you were getting your start, as you were brought into the fold, Steve O'Donnell was an immeasurable force to do with that.
Yeah, he was the head writer who hired me in 1990. I had known of him before that. I think when I was about to get out of college in 1987, I actually called the show, and how I even got a phone number, I don't know. I must have had some transient whiff of ambition briefly in my life. And then I got him on the phone in a weekday afternoon, which is nonsensical right there, because it was like being on the high speed treadmill of, oh my God, we have to tape the show in an hour. And somehow he got on the phone and had an amiable conversation with me. And I think I referenced that in the remarks I make.
You did.
Introducing him at the Writers Guild Awards. But yes, beloved and respected, but many people are respected without being beloved. Steve was both, because he was a real nice person who just related to people and wanted to meet them and find out about them. And if he saw a glimmer of something that entertained him, he was happy to try to help it find its home. And that with me and many other writers of that era, he saw something that he thought could be cultivated, and we were often given a little while to find our sea legs at the show. Later on, it was much more, if you're not getting good stuff on the air in the first 6 weeks or something, we're going to move you on out and try somebody else. I was allowed to find my way, and it, to my mind, and generously, it took many years. I don't think I was really, really good at that job until quite late in my tenure there. And even then, that's like a major league batting average is like, oh, you're hitting over 300. That's good. I mean, if you pitched 10 ideas and 3 of them were pretty good and worth trying, that would be a good average there as well. So anyway, Steve O'Donnell, I've told this story elsewhere. I don't know who's heard it, but my very first day at the Letterman show, April 30th, 1990, he met me at some elevator bank in 30 Rock, and I'm looking around. Oh my God, I'm in the big leagues. It's so exciting. And brought me upstairs and said, we got to find you an office. And on the 14th floor of the certain part of NBC,
Mm-hmm.
there were numerous empty offices. Several writers had skedaddled for the West Coast after the 8th anniversary show that winter.
Okay.
The show had been in LA and people had been having meetings and suddenly had new jobs offered to them. And there's a big turnover on the staff. So I was part of the new generation coming in that involved Paul Sims, Spike Ferriston.
Wow.
Steve O'Donnell said, let's get you in office. How about this one? And I said, sure. And I don't think, did we even have computers yet? Maybe we did. They had just started getting computers instead of typewriters. But what was unusual about this office was there were boxes of record albums on the floor. And I said, oh, what's all this with the records? He said, well, the previous writer in this office was in charge of a bit called Dave's Record Collection. And with these weird record albums, hey, maybe you could be the new Dave's Record Collection guy. And I said, sure, I guess. Okay. And
good place to start. Okay. So he's giving you something on your first day.
Right. He thought that I might have a good sensibility for that. But really, within the first 20 minutes of me arriving at 30 Rock, the first domino had been hit in a long chain, which would result in books, documentaries, lectures, public appearances, this whole twisted miniature empire, which grew out of that.
I'm very, very grateful that you set the table so beautifully when it came to that, because that was going to be my question is, okay, you kind of stopped at in the speech, you stopped at when he got you the gig. And I'm very interested to know, what the first year or two looked like for you. And you've really done a good job setting the table for that. Was it difficult? You're in the big leagues now, it's all new, and the attrition, like you said yourself, Major League Batter, 3 out of 10 for a comedy writer on a show like that. I would think it's not even, my word, the attrition of ideas. Was it difficult for you? Like, we had Tommy Ruprecht on not too long ago, and he talked about how, like, hey, what are some bits? The question I asked, what are some bits that you pitched that you wish would have got done, but they got left on the floor? And it was so funny because he thought about it and thought about it. He goes, the only ones I could think of are the ones from the first few weeks in the gig before I learned the skill to just let it go and move on to the next. And I don't know if that relates or not, but was that a difficult transition for you, or was it because you were so green, you just learned how to do it right from the start?
I had a couple other TV writing jobs, so luckily I had the worst of the greenery maybe had been seasoned out of me at the Comedy Channel, which had just started up before it was Comedy Central.
Yeah.
HBO is not necessarily the news, which was actually my first job. But
oh man, that's awesome.
I always, when we would meet with the interns every semester and sort of toward the end of a semester, they'd all come together and they could ask us questions, all the writers, and we would just try to give our perspective on what it all meant to us and what to keep in mind. One thing I always said was you have to learn to care enough to do a really good job and really push yourself to, like, okay, that's a pretty good joke, but what's a better joke? How can we push, but not care so much that you're hurt and wounded and knocked down painfully by something not getting on the show. So
right.
I'm sort of with Tom on that. Yes, there were pieces that didn't get on that probably would have been great. Sometimes they hovered right up at the edge and they were produced and ready to go and didn't get on somehow. Sometimes it was, I've always thought that if he had been pitched this idea on the right day, Dave might have loved this and then it would have gone. But who knows? It's a volume business, and the blessing and the curse was whether you stunk the place up one day or had like the funniest thing that you've ever had, the next day you're back in the same boat with everybody else with a blank slate, and you can redeem yourself or you can try to follow up something good, but you're always just, you get a new start every day pretty much.
Yeah, and that would seem to be the thing about I call it, the shorthand I call it is the Pants family. I mean, obviously, you know, it was before that with Latenight as well, before it was officially Pants and all that, but I just call it a shorthand, call it the Pants family. Is that seems to be, there's a few things that everybody I talk to, you know, I'm a good friend with Scott Ryan, who wrote Last Days of Letterman. It's my favorite book. And I love Carter's books. No offense to Bill Carter. I love his books. His books are just as dog-eared. I love this book though, because it really does a good job talking about the family. And it seems like so many of you guys and gals have such similar dispositions when it comes to certain things. And Dave is legendarily known for, you know, his postmortems and how you know, how hard he could be on himself or on the shows if that didn't go well. But that concept that, well, okay, at some point, even up to Dave, who has that reputation, at some point, what you just said, it's like a light switch that kicks on and goes, okay, well, tomorrow's a new show and we're going to start from scratch and we're just going to, you know, clean slate and take it from there. And maybe because of that culture, that's why there are so many people who had the longevity that they did, including the host himself. I don't know if that had to do with the longevity or not, but it seems like it might have.
You learned, if you found your way there, to trust. Like in the writer's room, I've heard of terrible writers' rooms where everyone is paranoid, everyone is scratching for credit. If I win, you lose, so I must win and you must lose. There's, I think, no shortage of rooms full of
Sharks,
people like that.
Shark
As I
Tank.
said,
Yep.
talented but not necessarily beloved people who populate certain branches of the industry. But we were lucky with a very long-term stable core of people who were comfortable enough with each other to say, I have the beginning of something, but I don't know where it goes, or I have this phrase and it may be stupid, but I'm just going to throw it out there. People would make themselves vulnerable on a daily basis in the writer's room and say,
wow,
whatever this is in my mind, I don't have it. You're going to have to help me. And maybe together we can make something that neither of us could have made apart. So on a good day, that would be like somebody else pitches the beginning of something that I couldn't have thought of, but then I add the detail that make, oh my God, now it's a slam dunk.
Yeah.
Two people together on in a room like that or more. We did things on a collaborative basis sometimes that were just everybody helping. But that took confidence that you believe these people are not rooting against you.
It's trust. It becomes a trust issue.
Yes,
Yeah.
you want to do well, you want to be funny, you have that ego, and you want to keep proving that you're worth the paycheck. So if a long time goes by and you're not getting anything on, that's not good. But you're also feeling like if Tom Ruprecht or Joe Grossman has the best idea today and the show is great tonight, well, we've all won. We know it'll be my turn next time or next week or whatever. And not all shows get to that sort of collective trust. And there's all these other ways things can go wrong along the way. Production bottlenecks and some news story flares up in mid-afternoon. You have to rewrite the whole show to be about that and throw away this other good stuff that you were excited about. So yeah, you just learn to trust people, hopefully, if it's a good place like that, and not agonize about what did get on. Hopefully over the long haul, you'll have some Hall of Fame pieces you'll be glad about, that they beat the odds and got on and were triumphant. Like one I remember is just one of these silly ideas. It was fairly late, and I think I did write a song for it. It was just, like a little music bit would start. Oh, you know what that song means, folks? It's time for my grape break. And there was a grape break song, and a grape lowered on a filament from the catwalk down to Dave. And the way I wrote it, it was just going to be like in a little box, and he would open the box and eat one grape, and it would be just a lot of effort for something nonsensical. But Dave kind of got a hold of it and said, oh, you know what? Put the grape on like a sewing needle. And then he did this long thing where he's trying to get the grape in his mouth, and you see shots of that stagehand with the fishing pole with the grape on it. And it was such good humored chaos because Dave was in the right mood that day and said, this is going to be stupid fun. And I couldn't have predicted how it would turn out. Some days, yeah, Dave would take something that you thought was this level and make it way up to here.
Yeah.
Just decided to run with it.
Well, and I think that safe to say, I mean, so many people talk about. There was an article that came out. I forget where it was. I apologize. I wish I can reference it, but it was like the top 10 David Letterman moments, and we even referenced it once on the show with somebody. They're all blurring together already. I can only imagine what it was like after thousands of shows, but
It's pretty blurry for me, honestly.
yeah.
I mean, I was there for 25 years.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea, though, that on one day, like you just said, there's one day that Dave may be way into this, the other may not. And there were things that were built that were like institutions because of that. There became rules. Don't write anything about this. And it became a rule all the way along. No, we never talk about that. We never write about this. We never write about that. It was on Tommy's show. That's where that was. And then, but at the end of the day, that rule may have just started from a mood that he was in that day, but then it became an institution within the show. And it's fascinating to know that that's the framework of the show, and the culture of the show came from that. I was fascinated by that.
There was a certain amount of Kremlinology of what has the great leader said, and what are the implications, and what might have been just a irritated, tossed off remark is now enshrined as some sort of inviolable rule.
Yeah.
And then later, no, I don't. I don't hate that. I don't know where you got that idea. And you
We're
wouldn't
like, what?
remember why it started. Yeah, so you do your best to try to understand an ever evolving ecosystem of rules and preferences, and at some point you found that, oh, but this contradicts that. Well, that's the nature of the game. Just like every day the mood may be different, and the show evolves and the world evolves, and now we're going to talk about this, and we're going to find our own way to put an imprint on something. Like after 9/11, the classic dilemma of, oh my God, the world has changed. How does comedy fit into this very different feeling world? And the very tentative ways that Dave tried to test, do we want to laugh? Do we think we should laugh at silly things? And are we still fully human beings that have all these impulses, not only grief, but optimism and laughter? And yes, we found our way slowly back to that.
Well, and it's funny, like that article that I was that I forgot to reference in the last thing that I said too was the top 10 moments, the top 10 Dave Letterman moments, and 8 of them or 7 of them were moments where he was reacting to something. Like it was like an off the cuff, because I don't know if there's anybody on the planet who's better at reacting to things the way that Dave does. The genius level of that. I think about after 9/11, you talk about this. I remember him saying, can we try a joke? Can we, okay, or is it all right that we, and I mean, I don't imagine that was scripted, like even just that part of it alone. That's the off the cuff. I mean, they call it a Midwestern sensibility, that aw shucks personality that he brought into it. Did it take you a long time to, I asked this question of all writers, or at least if I don't, I need to. Did it take you a long time to start writing in Dave's voice?
Steve O'Donnell recognized that I had some core sensibility that was a good match for the show.
Okay.
So he said, I'm going to put some chips down on this guy. I think things should work out. If he immerses himself in the show more, he'll be very good and reliable. I had watched the show actually very little, and I may be an extreme example of what I think is true of some of the earlier generation Letterman creative people. They were not necessarily enamored of television and did not absorb it like a sponge and worship it. I had seen the show, I don't know, probably a handful of times. The first time I ever saw it, I was flabbergasted. It was early 1983, and I was up late with some friends. I saw this show I'd never seen before, never heard of before. And I ended up on the floor, curled up in a fetal position, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. And yet I did not, from that moment, say, this is my life's destiny. I must
Right.
find these people and work with them. No concept of that. I didn't know TV shows had staffs, really. Yes, there's names going by at the end, but I didn't mentally connect to that. And I also didn't even think I've got to find a way to stay up late every night now and watch it. I don't, years went by in the mid 80s in high school and college where I really ignored the show completely. And so it sort of doesn't make sense that I ended up there, but it also makes complete sense because the early people like Steve O'Donnell and Dave himself, I think, had an interest but a skepticism for television. They were not hypnotized by the glamour and everything. They just thought, well, this is this strange part of our lives which we will acknowledge, and we will also satirize and keep at an arm's length sort of emotionally. And I was, so I came into the Letterman show not knowing a lot. I think when I started, I better cram, and I watched it every night for 2 weeks before I started. So I kind of, here I go, I can do this. But there was so much that I didn't know that I didn't know. Like maybe the average viewer wouldn't even know this either. But meetings, people would talk about, oh, should we have Calvert do this? What if Calvert does that? And I finally said, excuse me, who is Calvert? Come on, you don't know. Everybody knows. Well, it's Larry Bud Melman. That's what people on the other side of the TV know him as. I don't know how many people knew him as Calvert. So I actually didn't feel too bad about that.
Certainly not at that time. Anybody would have known at that time. I don't think anybody.
There was no internet message board where people were talking about behind the scenes of all this. But you'd have a good idea, and someone said, "Oh, we did that in February of '89," or and a fair amount of instances like that where somebody would have a good joke. The craziest version of that I ever had, which also was encouraging in a way, it was the new books segment at NBC.
Yeah.
And just like make up fake books that the props department would put together. And I proposed one. It was the New York City white pages arranged by height rather than alphabetical order.
Okay.
And I handed that in on my page of however many. And Steve O'Donnell called me down to his office and said, I see you had this. And I said, yeah. And he went over to a file cabinet and rummaged, and he found one of the other writers, like 3 years earlier, had written the same joke, and it had not gotten on. So there was no way I was drafting off of somebody else's idea. It's just that I bizarrely arrived at exactly the same conceptual bit of nonsense. And even then, I don't think it got on, but it told me, and probably Steve O'Donnell, yes, this is the right sort of person here for this place.
Well, oh man. Okay. So I got a couple things. I'm going to just go off the freshest thing that you said. Elizabeth Gilbert in one of her books talks about the idea that whimsy or inspiration, it goes from person to person until it's realized. And she's got examples of it in a couple of examples of it in one of her books. And she talks about that and how, okay, so because that, by her logic, because that joke wasn't put on the air, it's going to float to somebody else until it does get put on the air. Did that joke make it on the air when you did it, or has it ever been realized?
I think it has been now enshrined as this anecdote, but I don't think that it ever got on the show.
I gotcha.
So, I mean, people also talk about there was certain patterns of history where things were converging, and it was the time in history where somebody was going to invent the steam engine around this time. If it wasn't this guy, it would have been that guy, and whatever.
Yes.
And if a certain joke or TV show hadn't been invented by its credited person, then other people, like Thomas Edison, we give him credit for the light bulb. There were 10 other people working on light bulbs of varying degrees of complexity or efficiency. And there is some talk that he occasionally either stole or bribed or whatever, just so he could have the clean playing field on things. But yeah, I would see, I ran the monologue from 2004 to 2015.
Yeah.
And we would get jokes in, very professional, good, solid current events jokes. And then Jay Leno would have the same joke on the same night. And I don't think there was any foul play. It's just that
It's low hanging fruit
People
in a way, for lack of a better term.
People are working with the same set of news stories and the same internal templates oftentimes, and we'll get to the same point. You can't agonize over that. But the white pages one seemed so improbable to me.
That is really close.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your vocabulary a little bit. I haven't asked any of the other writers this yet. The thing that strikes me through so many of you, again, from Steve Weiner, who worked at the show a relatively short time, but was there at the very beginning, to guys who worked to yourself, I hear echoes of Dave's voice, and where I really hear it is in the vocabulary. At any point in your career, did you ever consult a thesaurus, or did you ever bone up on vocabulary, or have you always been gifted or at least interested in learning new words and things like that? I know I've got favorite words, and my next question is, do you have any favorite words? So I'm going to say favorite words. Are there 2 or 3 that pop into your mind?
I'm going to defer the favorite words question for a moment.
Okay.
Vocabulary, I think, just came by naturally, but being at the show and being at close range with Dave, I'm sure that I was bolstered in my appreciation of precise words and artful word choices. And I also loved when he would get things a little twisted in a wrong way that was even better than the usual reality. And some of it, I mean, is just willful silliness, like calling people by the wrong names.
Sure.
But sometimes they were so wonderful. Like I remember he was talking to Sarah Jessica Parker, and he said, how's your husband do? And he couldn't summon the name Matthew Broderick, or he decided to set the real name aside. And, how's your husband doing? Punky Brewster.
Yeah.
It's like, what neural pathway got him to that?
Yeah.
So I always appreciated that, and just the inner clockwork whirrings of his mind, able to connect disparate things and ornate, improbable details at lightning speed. I really admired, and part of that is verbal, part of it is conceptual. I think you can get too excited about words and get too heavy-handed, and simplicity, cut back. He always wanted to simplify it, cut it down, make it shorter. He didn't appreciate wordiness unless there was a joke about excessive wordiness, I think. So I tried to walk this line of being interestingly precise, yet not blah, blah, blah all the time.
Yeah, your guys' economy of words, all of you, I always feel bad because my economy of words is terrible. I am a writer. Like, I do enjoy writing. My wife and I wrote a book together, and I do enjoy writing. Not that I'm necessarily any good at it or entertaining by it, but I do enjoy it. But when I'm trading emails back and forth with you guys, I'm really cognizant that all of you are ninjas when it comes to economy of words. You can say in 2 or 3 sentences what it takes me 2 or 3 paragraphs to say, even though I think I'm being clever along the way. The idea of say it, but just don't reiterate it and get it down to that very quickly. Your economy of words is incredible. I don't know if you had that, if that was one of the sensibilities that Mr. O'Donnell saw in you, or if you learned that along the way. But yeah, your economy of words are incredible. But let's hey, he said look at that, somebody on the show took a compliment, probably to get me to shut up and stop saying it.
No, but I also wanted to show that I could do it with 1 syllable. But yeah, Dave was a great aficionado of artful brevity, and part of it was practical. He didn't want a monologue joke that spilled onto a second cue card.
Yes.
And so there'd be a lot of telegraphic, sort of implied, like, hot today, saw blah, blah, blah. Just like he could embellish it as conversationally as he wanted at whatever length and density he felt like in the moment. But he appreciated that things were boiled down and carved down to the bone. And so you if you had any affinity for that, you were only going to get better at it. So I think I probably did increase my ninja-like word use.
You sharpened the pencil or the sword, as the case may be. Yeah. I went and saw Dave, well, it's a couple months ago now in May, when he was recording the new show on Netflix, the stand-up show. That's My Time with David Letterman. And I mean, I'm right there in the third row. The first two rows are a planted audience. You know, it's a Netflix thing. They want to make sure they got their diversity and all that sort of stuff. It was a phenomenal experience, seeing him on stage again. I didn't think I'd ever get a chance to see him after that night was the last night I saw him, the night where we had that picture taken. And I was lucky enough to have my little moment with him photographed and immortalized. I didn't think I'd see him again. And watching him live, it was amazing. Everything you're talking about was still very, very true. And I didn't want to, get in trouble or disrupt the production, but I was turning around constantly because he had they didn't have the cue card. Todd wasn't there with the cue cards, but on a big plasma, I just dated myself, on a big screen behind the audience, there was his cue cards. They were there, and it was lovely, and how he could go through his process that way. And I was fascinated by it. I wanted to turn around and just look at the screen the entire time, but I would have disrupted the production and would have been told to, stop that. But it's fascinating to me how he can take the bullet points and just with the ears to hear what he actually says versus what's up there. A tremendous skill. And when you compare it to what Johnny used to do when Johnny had everything lined up all in one, very interesting. It shows right there the difference, I think, between a comedian and a broadcaster. I don't know if that resonates with you or not, but
I think it does. I mean, Dave started in radio in college.
Yeah.
And this early training in just being comfortable with a conversational flow, or even not a conversation, but just continuing to talk and form thoughts and marshal thoughts and have something to say.
Yeah.
If you become comfortable with that, it's a wonderful thing. I think he did get better and better at it over the years. One of those, maybe the Zinnemann book, pointed out, and this struck me. I don't think I'd ever considered this before. In the early 80s, he was not holding forth about his opinions and feelings and confusions about life. And then as the years went by, he felt more and more comfortable. Something I don't understand, or here's what happened to me on the weekend, and see if you think I'm crazy. Like, he would start expounding about things that he felt and that he experienced. And early on, he was much more of a cipher, and he would be asking good questions and listening and having a good conversation. But he was not as much a character in the show as he was this hard to pin down ironicist or something. And so he got better and better at that. And
yes,
I think after the Late Show ended, he realized, I just want to have interesting conversations with people.
Yeah.
I want to strip away the parts of the show from 20 or 30 years ago that I feel like I've had enough of, and just go into the deeper talk with people who interest me.
I was talking about this with, do you know who Jay Ryan is? The guy he's the guy that stole Dave's microphone. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember when Dave's microphone got stolen?
No, this is the first time hearing of it, and I'm outraged.
Are you serious? You don't remember this?
I don't know.
I hear you. Okay.
When was this?
Well, he had it was when the bridges, we got one of the bridges actually that's coming for our new set, which I'm very excited about. It was around the time when the red floor went away and they put up the bridges, which ended up being the kind of the stage dressing for the rest of the run. Dave had that old microphone that goes back to all the way to Jack Parr, that they stole it from NBC and they brought it over. Well, there was a night where that microphone was stolen. So Jay was the guy that took it, and he's trying to get it back to Dave now and all that sort of stuff. But I wasn't sure if you were aware of that. You guys did some bits about it the week of the set dressing show. Anyway, regardless, he and I were talking about that exact what you were just saying. He's a huge fan of Late Night versus Late Show, where I'm kind of the other way, where I love Late Show versus Late Night, even though I love the entire evolution of things. My very favorite segment of all time, and it's funny because in Bathtubs, one of the things that you see is you coming up and looking at the monologue going, okay, how much got butchered out? How much got taken out, right?
Yep.
I also know there's another place that would happen, which is my very favorite segment of television for 20 years, 15, 20 years, which was the first segment after the monologue at Late Show, when Dave would sit down and just talk to the audience. And many times we've come to learn, sometimes with a blue card, with a beautiful piece of comedy sitting right there. And sometimes he would just go the other way and start talking about, yeah. Have you seen how many shows there are about cakes? What are people doing? They're making cakes look like this and like that, or something like that. Talking about the bear. Well, the bear story was probably planned, but he would talk about moments of his life, and do exactly what you talk about. That's one of the things reasons why Late Show was the one that spoke to my heart even more than Late Night, because he did put so much of his personality into it, and got, you used the word earlier, vulnerable. And I think that just made the audience even that more endeared to him once he started becoming vulnerable. Long-winded way to get to this question: did the writing change when you recognize the fact that Dave was becoming more vulnerable, talking about some of these things? Did that change any of the way that jokes were written or topics? Did some of the things that were in the penalty box get released at that point?
Well, a couple of things happened over the course of the show evolving. One was, by the mid to late 90s, you had new shows coming in like Jon Stewart, who changed the complexion of the whole late night world. And suddenly, or maybe not suddenly, but definitely it became more expected that a show like Dave's would have its own take on the issues and the stories of the day. When I started in 1990, there were little crumbs of topicality in the top 10 list and a few monologue jokes, but they were not, like, it was not trying to be the Daily Show. It was
right,
a different kind of show. But then after a while, it was, well, we can't be the Daily Show, but what does Dave have to say about things? And he would occasionally do some bit that had a political bent. But
sure,
I think if there was a change, it was just sort of slow and systematic, and you saw and you followed along. But in terms of whether it's just about his personal curiosities and vulnerabilities and being able to, I mean, a great strength was the self-deprecating, I'm just a dumb guy, so I don't understand this. Maybe you, Tom Brokaw, can explain to me why.
yes,
So that is a very welcoming and inclusive way to say, you people at home may need to know more about this and not even know how to ask. I'm feeling the same way. Let's learn about it together. But then also just more emotional stuff, like once he was a father,
yeah,
and wrestling with just different stages of life.
yep,
I think there was probably a little more ability to do things that dealt with difficult emotions in comedy
yep,
sometimes. Like, I remember a bit of mine that Dave really liked. I wrote it for Thanksgiving and he brought it back for Christmas. It was this United Airlines commercial about, so you're supposed to go home for the holidays. You know you don't want to. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sell you a ticket for a fake United Airlines flight, and it's going to look very realistic. But at the last minute, oh no, that flight's been canceled. You wished you could have been there, but what can you do? And so it's like the agony of your family relationships and your ambivalence about, like, spending holidays with your
yeah.
family. It's going to be awkward, but you don't want to not do it. You want to have made the good faith effort. And so something about that gnarly human ball of emotions appealed to him.
That reminds me of one of the jokes he did on My Next Guest, which I forget who the guest was, which is ironic because they're supposed to need no introduction. They said to him, do you have siblings? And yes, I do. Okay, have you ever fought with your siblings? Or and Dave's response offhandedly, really quick, was, oh, I'll tell you when the fight's over. And then they moved on to the next topic, and that just reminds me of that. I can see how that would appeal. I think you're right. I think as time went on in the fatherhood thing, after the heart attack, for sure, that vulnerability started showing up more and more on air, and I just found
Not,
it. Oh, go ahead.
not technically a heart attack.
Sorry, the heart surgery. Yes, thank you. I can't believe I made that mistake. I correct people on that shit all the time, and
I was
thank
just gonna, not technically a heart attack. His heart exploded, which is also not true, but I think he liked to say that. But
I love when he goes hyperbolous. I love that. I like when he talks about, he got fired from CBS, or they got fired from NBC because Paul was stealing office supplies, or what. I love Dave's hyperbolous nature of things. I just find that really almost comforting.
That way that he could tilt reality 22 degrees and it sounds plausible, but it's completely not right. Like one of my favorite tiny things.
Yeah.
That I have quoted to friends over the years. I don't know what year this would have been, mid 90s, I guess, based on when the movie came out. He was talking about that movie Speed.
Yes.
And his capsule description of the movie Speed was that it was about a talking bus that goes nuts. Which seems like, I don't think that's right, but it almost sounds plausible.
That's yes, that is it. Now that was Dave. That wasn't written for him. That was just Dave being Dave, right?
Right. And who knows if he made that up on the spot or thought of that earlier. Once in a while, you'd say something in his presence that he filed away for future use. Like one time when I would see him in the afternoon working on the monologue or something, and I don't know if he had a cold or something, and I said, "Oh, you've got the drug resistant TB," and like 2 days later, like he was at the desk and coughed and said, "Oh, I've got the drug resistant TB." So like he just held on to stuff for possible future use, and I was well-paid writer on the show. He could take my offhanded remarks and repurpose them from dawn to dusk, and I would be fine with it.
Absolutely. Oh, well, Mr. Mulligan and I had a conversation this week, Jerry Mulligan and I, and he talked about that too. He talked about how sometimes he would slip jokes in just to make Dave laugh. The one that he referenced was a dick joke that obviously could not make air. It was there was a story in the news about a doctor who was having inappropriate appointments with his clients or with his patients, and so there was
this is the first I'm hearing of this, and I am outraged.
And many of the patients were as well. A select few probably weren't. But anyways, it was a thermometer joke. And so Jerry put in the packet or whatever, the way that the doctor was taking the temperature. Well, Dave then on air a few days later spontaneously, changed it up a little bit and used the word finger instead of what Jerry said on it. So it was almost like Jerry put that in to make Dave laugh, and then Dave threw it into the show to kind of ping pong it back to Jerry. And when he told me that, and again, the camaraderie, I think there's so many of us that live vicariously through the camaraderie that y'all had, folks who wanted to just desperately be an intern so they could be part of that. Like I think about Brian Tetta's journey. I want to live vicariously through that career. Like the guy shows up as an intern, ends up coming up on air, talent a little bit here and there, moves up, segment producer. Now he's executive producing The View. All of that sounds exquisite, except for the View part. The camaraderie that you guys and gals had, again, a family is the only way I can describe it. With what Jerry said there, it made me think, okay, I'm going to ask Steve that question. Was there ever anything that you threw in, whether it be a monologue joke or something that was, this is just for Dave because I know it's going to make him smile. I know he's going to take it and just do something else with it. But did you ever do any of that?
Yeah, I remember I used to write a lot of the From New Yorks and Man Who's. Eventually, after 9/11, it was just From New York, the greatest city in the world. But we would need batches of From New York, the world, just whatever odd phrase, and then and now bad boy electrician Dave Letterman, just whatever odd phrase you might have seen in the news or conjured yourself. For staffers' birthdays, or at least writers and other maybe producers, you would get a bottle of very nice champagne from Mr. Letterman with a little card, happy birthday or whatever. So I had not yet like the day after, I thought, oh, well, I guess I should write him a thank you note. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to hand him a page of from New York's, and like sprinkled in there is going to be thanks for the champagne, Dave. And he picked that one.
No kidding.
But then I don't think it went on the air. I think somebody thought it was fun that he put it in the page. It was even more fun that Dave played along and picked it. But really, we're not going to do that one.
We're going to stop the tomfoolery right now. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you know about Celibrigum.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about Celibrigum. That's on my list. Right. Yep.
Well, that was this project that I did just for the sheer pleasurable stupidity of it. But Dave really got behind it, and it was never on the show.
Yeah,
it was just this satellite project, but he took pleasure in it and decided to elevate it and play along, and actually paid a lot of money out of his own pocket to frame and professionally mount dozens of the photos at that year's late show holiday party, which was at an art gallery downtown with all the photos around the walls. And that seemed like, all right, he called my bluff. He liked my joke, and then he expanded on it and made it, we're going to make this way too big now.
Yeah, he rolled up his sleeves and said, check this out. Okay, so I'm okay at this. I really appreciate when I have someone on the other side who's actually better at this than me and can lead the conversation. Tom Bones Malone did the same thing. He basically, in the first 10 minutes of our interview, asked all the questions that I kind of wanted to ask. He summed everything up so we could go deeper with that. You bringing up Celibrigum right there, and you bringing up also the fact that you used to do Alan Kalter's copy, for this, because this is stuff that fans want to know that I don't necessarily get around to saying, and because I'm so excited just to shoot the shit with you. Thank you for talking about how you were the one of the ones who did those amazing Alan Kalter bumpers that he would do in between the commercial breaks or from New York. And I love after 9/11 how it became the greatest city in the world and kind of stayed there. Did you also, because at a certain point it changed from broadcasting from New York, in the heart of New York, and broadcast all around the world or something like that? The copy changed. Do you remember when and why that changed?
That particular detail I don't remember, but okay. You mentioned we called them the Act Fives in the last, I don't know, 8 or 10 years of the show, just like coming up tomorrow on the Late Show, Dave's guests are blah 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 blah, and then there'd be some strange offhanded comedic flourish of some sort.
Yeah,
and that became my fiefdom, and I was very happy about that, very protective of it, because it could be a true full flowering of a cheerful, absurd sensibility that still was exactly true to the show. But what Dave loved about weird stuff in the Act Five, it did not live or die according to an audience reaction, because it was just the band was playing and everyone was going like this. And if you heard what Alan said and thought it was funny, great. If you heard it and just thought that's weird, it didn't appear that the show had been damaged. So that was one of the last places you could be wildly strange and experimental with no downside.
And it was cool too, because Alan, in his delivery, I'll tell you the genesis of where I actually jumped off the pier and decided to do this show was after Alan passed away, because at the end, I have such adoration for that man, having never met him or spoken with him. I just adore him, and he was one of the guys that would be the low-hanging fruit that would probably be willing to come on, 5, 6, 7 times to just shoot the shit about memories on the show. He was from every person who talks about Alan Kalter, I just appreciate how kind and generous and how just willing he is to be accessible. The fact that he would take those Act 5 lines many times and put them on him or something like that, I just really appreciate that about him. And the fact that oh, my granddaughter's coming in. Look at this. Hi, sweetheart. I'm so sorry about that. Look at that. This is my granddaughter right there.
Wow.
Hi,
Congratulations.
Sweetie. Thank you very much. Mimi's call. Okay, so go up and talk to Mimi. I'll be up in just a few minutes. Yeah, I'm almost done, my love. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, my love. Steve says bye. Okay, she said bye. Thank you for putting up with that. Alan would take some of those lines and make them about him, or if where you wrote them about him, and it would just make the lore of Alan Kalter that much stranger. Did you ever write any of Alan's pieces, his remotes or anything like
Oh
that? Or
yeah,
by
yeah.
that time, oh, you did? Any that come to mind that you're particularly fond of?
I think we did it at least once. I was like, Alan Kalter makes your company's product sound sexy, just some weird thing like that. He really was, and I don't know if they fully understood this when they hired him. He was another ultra powerful secret weapon for the show, in the same way Paul Schaefer turned out to be the perfect foil and balance for Dave. And we lucked out again and again. Like Rupert, he was just right there. I don't know if there was only a few interactions that Dave would regularly have with people. One was Jack Hanna, and other times if it was Dave talking to Rupert. But my comedy damaged mind would be set free from its shackles, and I would just roar with laughter at what was happening with Dave talking to Rupert. And he just happened to be there in that deli when we moved there, and he was just this charming, good-hearted guy who would just nod and sort of look rueful or placid or whatever, and just what a bizarre, wonderful chemistry that was with him.
I don't know if you, again, I would not be at all surprised if you're like, okay, this guy's an amateur, I'm just going to lead this whole thing. I don't know if you did this on purpose or if it was just serendipitous. And it's just one of the delights of my day is to get one of my heroes or architects of the thing that I love most, which is the Late Show, and put them into an unwitting, make them unwitting accomplishment, I can't even say the word, partners in a commercial. But the Letterman podcast is brought to you by the Hello Deli. Our one and only sponsor is brought to you by the Hello Deli, Rupert G's Hello Deli, nestled in the womb of the Ed Sullivan Theater, and one of the only places on earth you can buy Late Show with David Letterman merchandise. Please go to hello-deli.com if you want to get a Rupert t-shirt, a David Letterman mug from the Late Show, or other plethora of merchandise. And if you ask him really nicely, he does pack them himself. And if you ask really nicely, he may add onions to your order. So hello-deli.com. Go on there, the one and only sponsor of the Letterman podcast. We love you, Rupert. Thank you very much. And Steve does too, apparently, because it was gold, everything that you guys did. Did you know that? Did you know that beforehand, or was that they sponsor us?
No, I didn't know that.
Happened the way it was supposed to.
Serendipity, I say, yes. And good business sense for all involved.
I'm so grateful about this. Celibrigum, yes. Before we finish off, one thing I appreciate about you, and I can say this, you know, if you want to get to know Steve a little bit more, again, he is quoted verbatim many times in this book here, and you definitely get a chance to get to know his sensibility. Hopefully that has come across here. The comedy damaged mind that he talks about here. I mean, you've seen so much, and the fact that you still even have the ability to laugh. To go back to Bathtubs for a second, the moment
pretend to laugh.
Okay, well, there you go. I've seen childlike delight on your face, and it was when in Bathtubs when you somebody said something, I forget which commercial it was. Have you ever heard this commercial? Oh, it's so, or not commercial, this track off of one of the musicals. It was delightful. And you're just kind of standing there and looking at something, and then the record player starts in the background, and the commercial starts, and the smile on your face, like literally childlike joy, shows up.
Yes, I know that moment. And please don't confuse your viewers and listeners. These were not commercials.
No,
these were musical productions only for in-house infotainment for the sales force. But yes, that was the Frigidaire 1963 song where you can put payoff punch in your selling with power of Frigidaire or something. And it was one I'd never heard, but I immediately recognized, oh, this is a good one. And I already have a suspicion about who wrote it based on the style. And I was vindicated years later when I went back and did some more archaeology in the families of a deceased composer with all the files in the basement. And I found, yes, I was correct. But anyway, yes, this child
joy
wonder, I always retain that, I think. And even if so many millions of jokes over the decades have beaten down and burned out certain receptors that make me able to laugh with childlike wonder. I still can regard things with childlike wonder and enthusiasm, especially when they're not like scripted and meant to be funny and put through a whole production pipeline. It's the spontaneous moments of surprise that really can get me.
Well, and that full circle back to Rupert right there, because again, you could never script those moments, where Rupert was just, being himself in front of the camera and kind of look, and the things that they would go back and forth with, the double meetings of things, and Dave's reaction, the ping pong, the spontaneity. I appreciate that. So, go ahead.
Oh, sometimes we would play with that. Like we would say, let's take a look back at all the different talented actors who have played the Paul Schaefer role over the years, like pretending that it had all been just cast and, oh, that guy for a couple of years. Yeah, he wasn't quite right. Oh, I don't remember him. But then we found this guy in 1994, and he has been our Paul Schaefer ever since. And isn't he marvelous, ladies? So we sort of play with the reality of what exactly any of this was at its core. And it was clear that it was a joke, but it was also like, if it's plausible. I think Dave loved things that were wrong but plausible. That was part of his core sensibility.
Well, and go back to the record collection, okay? Because then the fun facts books or the different parody books that you did over the years, but the record collection, they were actually real records. And again, as the viewer, you weren't sure, like the plausibility of things. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of humor in that, and the fact that you can dissect it again. Everything at its highest level is philosophy. You, sir, are a comedy philosopher. There's no question about that. I want to be conscious of everybody's time here, so I'm gonna cut it short here. Giller always gets he always points this out to me whenever I ask somebody if they will come back on air. He said, that they are required to say they will come back. They're not going to say they're not going to come back if you do that. And that's when I politely say to Don, yeah, I know, because I'll use any tactic that I can to get them to come back. Can you and I do somewhere down the line, can we do a podcast about bathtubs and do that? Maybe that's the next way I can weasel my way into a conversation with you, Steve.
Absolutely, yes. There'll be a long list of conditions, and
of
you
course.
might not be able to meet them. But for now, let the record show that I cheerfully agreed.
The record, it is so entered into the record. I finish off these episodes by asking a question. I love Dave's evolution. Many of us who watch this love Dave's evolution. Many of us have their favorites, of course, favorite times of Dave's career. I love that he's moved into long form now. I think it is a natural evolution, and we've alluded to that, I think, in our discussion today. I love that he's doing long form, the kind of the Tom Snyder thing with my next guest. If there were three people, and I say living or dead, if there were three people living or dead that you would like to see, if you were the show booker and you didn't care anything about metrics, pop culture, where it's at now, anything like that, if there were three people that you would like to see Dave do the long form with on my next guest, who would those three people be?
So it can be living or dead.
Yes,
can
sir.
We also add alive but in a vegetative state?
Yes, we certainly can, because that would very much test Dave's skills tremendously. There probably would be no bigger test than that.
All right. I'm just gonna go by pure raw instinct here.
Yep.
I'm gonna say Winston Churchill.
Oh, that's yep.
I'm gonna say Lenny Bruce.
Awesome.
And I'm gonna say all right. I shot out of the gate so well. I'm just gonna have to throw something else in here on the top and call it a day. But how about Norman Rockwell?
Oh my God. Those are three awesome answers. Man, I can't tell you. Does it translate through the ones and zeros how grateful I am? I hope it does.
Steve, very much. It's very flattering, and and slightly alarming, since I just think, well, it's the thing I did for a long time, and that was great, and I regret nothing. And I also, I, as I said at the outset, it's not my bailiwick to be the fan and the archivist, and I'm
Yeah.
so thrilled that there are people who are doing it right. And yet it feels odd to me. I understand the impulse because I do it on a different sphere,
Yeah.
and so I don't think it's at all odd or wrong. I just have now the experience of being on the other side of something where all my composer friends who wrote industrial shows are surprised that people are asking them about it and want to keep talking about the diesel engine show or whatever.
Yeah.
So I've felt it on both sides now, but I salute you.
Well, I appreciate that more than you'll know. If people want to come follow you, obviously steveyoungworld.com is where the website is, and there's some very cool things that are archived on there, and I think it does a pretty good job of going through all the different categories of how people might access you and some of the projects you've been a part of. Are you still doing now that kind of the world is opening back up again? Are you still doing any lecturing or public speaking, that sort of thing? Are there ways that people can get a hold of you?
Starting to get some feelers going on some live shows again. Nothing to announce yet, but I hope to be able to nail something down in the coming months and start going out again and showing some of the crazy, beautiful, bizarre film clips from The Bathrooms Are Coming or the GE Silicones musical or whatever.
Yeah. My hope is that as this thing grows and whatnot, I'm really enjoying coming into this world the way that I have been. My hope is any of you people who worked for the show or part of the Pants family along the way, the wish is there that at some point we can cross paths where I can actually, whether it's hire a former writer to help me with some jokes or something like that, or to somebody who Tom Dreesen does comedy workshops, things like that. I want to employ him for a night somehow, some way to do that. I feel the exact same way about you. I would love to support that. If people want to reach out to you, is the website the best way to do it? Are you on the social channels as well?
Yeah, there's links on steveyoungworld.com to the various social media things, but I think there is a direct email thing to click as well if you have even more questions about the grape break segment or what we went into. But yeah, I'm ambivalent about social media, as I think many people are in different ways, and mostly it's just a venue for me to put up strange photos that I take. And I was very proud also, speaking of photos, sometimes I would show Dave Letterman weird pictures I took, and there was one that he was so enamored of. Again, he just said, I need this enlarged and framed in my office. And what a stamp of approval that some odd moment that you captured with a camera resonated with him so much.
Oh, what was the picture?
It was I think in Riverside Park in New York. In the foreground, there was a guy splayed out on the ground. He was hot and had taken his shirt off, and he was like on the sort of marble steps of some monument or something. He was just exhausted and flopped over. And in the background, there was a guy facing away from the camera in a t-shirt playing violin, and it is evocative and weird and urban and random. And he just said, that I need that.
We've had Mark Carzan on the show who did the late night bumpers early on and whatnot. And I love odd, absurd pictures like that as well. And that seems akin to me, is very similar in style and bent perception, perhaps a little bit.
Yeah.
What a way to end. I appreciate you giving of your time and, as you said, becoming a little bit chatty. Thank you so much for this. Of course, a shout out to Mr. Steve O'Donnell, who made this happen, who made this connection happen and whatnot.
Yes.
Thank you. You talk about, go ahead.
Oh, Steve O'Donnell, by the way, in the finale of Bathtubs Over Broadway, the big musical finale, no, without spoiling it too much, but he is in it. He makes a cameo appearance in it, which I love because he was the one, as I said, who on that long ago first day at my job as a late show writer, Letterman writer, put me on the track of the record collection. And then 28 years later, it had flowered to the point where there was a movie that we could put him in about the same thing.
Oh, a great way to segue. And when we do, I don't know if you still have it or not, but the sequence tuxedo jacket you were wearing, I don't know if you still have that jacket or not, but
that one had to go back to the Edith Head costume department at NBC Universal or whatever it was. But yes, people ask me about that sequin jacket, so I'm going to have to buy one of my own someday, clearly.
Well, something to wear on stage when you're doing your lectures, I think, right there. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you, as I've said privately to so many of you, thank you for helping to create the odd brain pathways that have made me who I am. And it is odd, but I am so grateful for it. I appreciate you. I appreciate everything that you have done. Just read Celibrigum, everyone. If you want to see somebody who puts a lot of thought into something that might not really go anywhere, and you look at the care of the words put in there, you will see the heart of Steve Young. Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate this.
Celibrigum.com. It's a blog. I've left it up. It ended, and then I just thought, well, I'm just going to leave it there.
Yeah, well, and it's good because like an undiscovered treasure, people will pick it up and they will appreciate it. It's so awesome. Thank you very much. Until we talk again, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. There it is, another episode of the Letterman podcast. Thank you so much for everything. Until I don't have to say this anymore, please like, share, subscribe. I cannot wait until the scale is to the point where I don't got to say that anymore. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really enjoying the process at this part of it as well. So thank you very much, everybody. My name is Mike. Oh, go ahead.
Would you actually at some point say we have too many subscribers? If you could find it in your heart to sort of drift away from us, we'd appreciate it.
Hey, I hope to be faced with that choice at some point. It would be a very interesting to see what I would say when I have that perspective. So let's see what happens. Let's check it out and find out. So share it with everybody you know, and then one day maybe we'll see if we tell you, well, okay, time to back it off.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. My name is Mike Chisholm. This is the Letterman podcast. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.